Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be checking out the new epicseven patch, and with it, couple new interesting characters have been introduced to the lineup. But without further ado, let's get into it. First and foremost, the full list is as follows: Desert Jewel Bazaar, Strays, Holiday Euphine, Tywin, Charles, Fenris, General Perus, Assassin Cartuja, and 2 artifacts in the form of Lycas and the Huayang artifact that burns. But in addition to this, let's actually break down each of the characters first and then move to the artifacts next. Now, the first thing I want to comment about the Desert Jewel Bazaar change is that they have changed him to now be more speed and health reliant in terms of what he's been granted currently. From what I understand, he is now going from rather low health and speed base at 111 speed and roughly 4.3k HP to now 4.8k attack or 4.8k HP and 117 speed. In addition to this, however, they're also giving him an additional reset in terms of scaling for his abilities. His S1 now heals based off of the target's max health, and in addition to this, now with his S2, not only do you dispel 2 buffs instead of blinding, in this case you also grant the chance of decreasing the combat readiness of the enemy by 20%. Now, beyond this, when it comes to his S3, he now no longer has an adamant shield effect or a proof of valor effect only against critical hits, but rather now this is just in general. Now, I will say this does make him pretty interesting. I think this is kind of long overdue though. Desert Jewel Bazaar scaling with attack made no sense, and so all these changes making him now more catered towards healing and such is fine. I do want to make the specific remark, however, that this dispel buff and apply a pushback by 20%, similar to the hit chance of Desert Jewel Bazaar's S2, is pretty conditional. Now, I do want to say that I actually think that in most cases, I believe that the hit chance felt a little bit more annoying, and 20% combat readiness in certain cases can also be difficult to deal with as well. However, depending on who or where you're taking this new Desert Jewel Bazaar into, there's a chance that you might not even be able to use this combat readiness push that well, as opposed to something like a blind. Now, to be more specific, if you were to say take someone like Desert Jewel Bazaar against a team that had barriers and you played against slower characters like Navy Captain Landy, Abyssal Euphine, etc., this combat readiness push isn't nearly as debilitating as blinding someone like Abyssal Euphine for 2 turns. But ultimately, I do think that the strip is pretty cool, although again, I've always felt a little bit weird about this S2, as it would insinuate that you would need a little bit of effectiveness if you want to use it on anyone meaningful, and otherwise it's just a check and a prayer, I guess, that you aren't fighting against a DPS that has ER, which again might be relevant with ML Arya coming out. Moving beyond this, and we now have a bit of a quality of life change for Strays. His S3 no longer has this conditional where you have to care about how much attack he has, and now he just penetrates the highest health target, plain and simple. It doesn't matter if you have attack increase, it doesn't matter exactly what you have, he just fully pens. And that's cool. In addition to this, though, they also made it so now that his S2 will strip or dispel all buffs instead of just 2 buffs, which is also really nice. However, in truth, I don't think this necessarily changes too much about how the character will be played. There may be certain scenarios where you will end up using something like the dispel against like really bulky teams as a whole that stack a bunch of buffs, period. However, in general, I think that the pen change here is just nice for players that are new and starting out in epicseven, and otherwise maybe you can skimp out on perhaps not necessarily needing an attack increase, but I don't think this will change too much of how Strays is currently being used. Next, though, we have a pretty sizable change for Holiday Euphine. Now, first and foremost, they're increasing the chance for her burn to from 75 to 100, which is nice for people that are relying on the burn on S1, which again can be quite helpful, especially if you're fighting against someone like the Spirit Eye Selines of the world and characters that only activate if you crit against them, or rather dealing with characters that will counter you if you crit them, and therefore something like a burn can deal with characters of that nature. However, the biggest change I would say actually here is the fact that now, as opposed to before where you had this increased evasion or this additional 35% evasion when the caster was at max health, this has now been I guess more loosened in terms of how restrictive this is. And now, so long as you're at least 50% health or more, you maintain this evasion bonus still. Now, I do want to say that this is pretty obnoxious, honestly, if you're someone that's fighting against or using someone like Fire Litica against teams like this, as what it used to be is that you would wait for maybe the Holiday Euphine to take a turn, and then you would then just hit it one time and then beat up the Holiday Euphine with a 65% chance. But now, with you having to get below 50% health, this makes it a bit more annoying. And even at below 50% health, you still have to deal with a 35% chance and some other nonsense, perhaps like Guide to a Decision or Snow Crystal, which again, both of these things feel kind of annoying as a whole. Now, the additional 5% combat readiness push is nice and being reasonable. If this is roughly something like used in a team with 300 speed, this does mean that you roughly gain 15 speed to what you would have given before, but of course it depends on the teams that you have on your team. Next, we have a buff to Tywin, and Tywin's change is pretty nice in terms of being able to now activate his commanding shout more regularly. I do also like the defense break on his S1. This Dispel 1 buff, and honestly even the chance for this Tywin S1, I have a feeling this will end up getting increased or changed in the future. I understand the idea behind not wanting every single character to have something like a 100% guaranteed chance to have defense breaks, but as we've seen through other characters in the past, they typically end up increasing a lot of the buffs on a character or increasing the effect chances of characters from really weird numbers, like perhaps like 40 or like 30 to something like 50, or something like 75 to 85 or 85 to sometimes even 100. And I suspect that this 65% chance the defense break will end up reaching a higher mark than what this is currently, which is 50 at base and 65 if you remove this new or equip this new EE and remove the old one. But overall, I think that Tywin still works where he works. I don't think, however, most people will be using this character as much, especially with ML Arya and Arunca kind of taking the show, and with new knights like Fallen Cecilia and old knights like Bellion and Ambitious Tywin still being pretty usable and good themselves. But it is still an interesting change and maybe nice for Guild War if you are someone that wants to use this character while still fastening how quickly you basically beat up an enemy in Guild War. Now, this is probably one of the biggest changes that we have thus far, though. This change to Charles is something that most players, if you are someone that played in 2019, 2020, are probably the most afraid of, because Charles back in the day was one of the most obnoxious counter characters in the world. And while a lot of people now, as of late, may consider someone like Rem, Violet, or even more recently someone like Navy Captain Landy and Abyssal Euphine as the real counter characters that broke the game, Charles was the originator. to be blunt, his countering was powerful. It was difficult to deal with him at times just because of, well, he was a knight and he was a character that dealt a lot of damage, and this two-pronged attack was really annoying to deal with, as not only did it deal decent damage, it also dispelled buffs from your characters or whatever enemy that it hit. Now, beyond all this, I think that what's probably the most interesting about this character now, though, is just the fact that he provides a lot of buffs to himself now. Now, that isn't to say that he didn't do this before, but if you just take a look for a moment, he now gives himself defense. In addition to giving defense to the entire team, he grants himself a counterattack buff, which now then allows you to maybe use something like destruction set or some other sort of set, maybe even protection set, which may even be more annoying for Charles as a whole. But next, if we take a look at the buff that's been added to his smash and his slash, these have now been changed to dispel a buff with his S1 or the first proc, and now with the S2 it increases the combat readiness of all his allies by 15% while also healing at the exact same time. Now, if you thought that Charles from the past was annoying because he would heal and he would deal, or rather I should say blow you up, and he could, you know, apply a debuff to you, or if it felt like maybe he was a bit more annoying because it felt like you couldn't get rid of him quick enough, well, now he heals himself on top of also providing pretty good team-wide buffs as a whole. I mean, like the defense increase and the attack increase is pretty nice. The attack increase, of course, you know, just the icing on the cake in terms of being able to do more damage to the enemy team. But this, in addition to the defense that he provides to all allies for 2 turns, and the counterattack, is kind of like a barrage or a mountain of free stats that he's now gaining, as he is now no longer necessarily gated behind having to use something like counterset, and instead he can now use something like destruction, or again, lifesteal, anything that you want to, well, basically use now. Now, beyond this, I do want to say that the changes that they have to his EE now do look a little bit more interesting, as they now increase, or they have a way for you to have a guarantee, or not guaranteed, but a 100% chance to dispel a debuff, or to dispel a buff from the enemy by 100%. However, what I do think most people will probably end up using is increasing the damage dealt by smash, and they'll probably use him as a pseudo, maybe when Mort isn't available, or when you're not fighting against Mort type counter character. I could also foresee people just using this to beat up a lot of cleavers if they start using a bunch of water units for whatever reason. I'm looking at you, Ran. And of course, he's a decent pairing if you're going to use him with someone like Senya, and if you're planning on using him alongside Senya in content like Arena or Guild War, this is maybe something or a place where Charles can shine. That said, we'll have to see exactly how much the combat readiness push and the healing affects his actual play, but I do think that now probably the biggest change of all is just the fact that you now have, assuming that you have assuming that you have the attack, defense, and counter buff alongside maybe anything else that you have on Charles, but assuming that you at least have 3 or more buffs, his smash now being guaranteed to activate after his S1 is pretty annoying. And unless if they've changed it since the last time that we've played Charles will actually activate this even on counter, which will probably piss off a lot of you and will likely force a lot of you guys to continue, if not increase, your usage of Mort against teams with Charles. And you know, what the hell, for probably like good old time's sake, I'll probably put Charles on my defense just to give people a bit of PTSD for how annoying he was. But ultimately, overall, I think all the changes are fine. I think the skill cooldown decrease on Soulburn is it's kind of fine. I don't think it's anything super crazy, but overall, he's looking to now take the spot, or maybe be put in a team with someone like the young Senya, and maybe deal with, I don't know, a character like perhaps a water unit like Karina or Arya. But we'll have to see, as again, I don't necessarily know how impactful a character like Charles will be, when again, there are characters like Lidica, and there are other ways to stop counters as a whole. Now, in terms of Fenris, now you guys have probably seen the controversy about this character. Unfortunately, I didn't cover it on this channel, and I apologize. But originally, there was a change to Fenris that involved giving him a specific change designed or targeted alongside a specific hero. And what I mean by that was that when he was against a Harseti opponent specifically, he had a specific effect on his, or in his kit, that has since been removed. And now what they're giving him is a increase to all allies by 30% after using his S3. But for his unwavering will, he does also now dispel 2 debuffs from all allies as opposed to 1. Now, again, I do want to say that in terms of what this change has done to Fenris, this is kind of a, I don't want to say a nothing burger of a change, as I do think that there are always cleavers that will try and cook up the changes to this. However, it's a little bit difficult to argue for the value of someone like Fenris right now, especially when it feels like if you AoE, or if you aren't someone that prevents the enemy team from moving, or if you aren't some sort of cleave character that will one-shot an up-and-coming character like Arunka, or, well, up-and-coming Arya, it feels like maybe the value here is a bit lost. Again, I do recognize that his S3 does deal a decent amount of damage, and the 30% combat readiness push can be helpful. However, in terms of why you would use Fenris, it feels a little bit more difficult to justify picking this character over someone like Commander Pavel in some cases. And to be clear, them changing the fighting spirit to his I guess just gaining S1, or just gaining it upon like using his S1 presumably, it feels like this is not nearly as insane of a change as people might have wished or hoped. Now, again, I am not necessarily in the party that said or agreed with having a character specific change, although I do think that buffing some of the worse off or the less cared for or loved characters is still a good direction, or still a good move, I should say. But Fenris doesn't really feel too crazy here. I've used Fenris to try and one-shot things, and I know that in the showcase from back in the day, they did try to show him fighting against someone like if I'm not mistaken, it was Bride Senya, which was okay. It's commendable. But truthfully, you really do want to be able to deal with one of the meta characters in some way, shape, or form if you're one of these characters. And otherwise, there should be a certain level of, I guess, like quality of life that's improved or changed with him. And I don't necessarily see that for him, though. Of course, I do think that the gaining fighting spirit change on S1 is fine. And I guess also dispelling debuffs is pretty usable as a whole. Overall, we'll see how the combat readiness push here works, though. I don't suspect this will change too much. Again, he doesn't counter Harsetti, so this is still going to be a character that has to deal with Harsetti as a character, I guess, that might be a little bit annoying to deal with as a whole. Maybe the combat readiness push will be viable if you end up somehow pairing this character with like a Zeo and you could push back the Harsetti. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm not super impressed, though, honestly, specifically about this character. This debuff part, I just, as a short aside, feels especially hollow because like this is insinuating that like what's stopping a cleave team from killing an enemy team is like the debuffs, and not like the Abyssal Euphine that just like one shot you know, your cleave units. Anyways, regardless though, we should talk now about General Perus, who has been changed to be a bit more reliable as well and less RNG. First and foremost, they buffed his chance on his S1 to 100% from 75 to now provoke. Great quality of life and just a more reliable change for him. Well appreciated. In addition to this, now with this S3, it's no longer a 100% chance to stun only 2 enemies, and now it's a, well, what it should have been from the beginning, which is a 100% chance to stun any targets on the field. Well, there being a 100% chance to do that for 1 turn instead, which again just feels like something that should have existed to begin with. Like, I get it, a 100% chance to stun on a character maybe back in the day was a bit more concerning or scary, but honestly, I think this is one of the only characters that has this, like, you can only affect a certain number of characters despite hitting everyone type deal. And honestly, it's just nice for General Perus to receive any sort of love, which I'm on board with. I do recognize, however, that, you know, for those of you that are maybe fearful of the Golden Boys coming back, I don't think this is quite enough to bring them back. As, you know, if you want something that combat readiness pushes like this, well, we've got Ilanov and we've got a lot of other characters coming up that'll probably do something like this instead. Now, in addition to this, for the exclusive equipment, the healing now, or the added heal to his S1, is okay. I guess this maybe incentivizes building him on counter or something to that effect, which again I think is fine. But most General Peruses that I've seen are either just full HP or triple HP, or they'll be on protection set, and as a result, I don't know how viable or how important either these changes or these exclusive equipments are, unless if I guess you're using this for maybe something like Wyvern, but again, you're always at the mercy of 15% even in content like that. Next, we have a change to Assassin Cartusia, where now, again, similar to General Perus, he's just a bit more reliable. He deals damage or increases his damage dealt proportional to his HP, and now with his S1, he has a guaranteed chance to, or guaranteed a 100% chance to provoke. Minor changes. Assassin Cartusia is Assassin Cartusia, and honestly, he's just been power crept effectively by ML Peyra if you have her. So it's a bit unusual that they changed him in this way specifically. There's a chance now, however, that if these multiplier changes are enough, that he would be usable, sometimes maybe even with someone like Peyra. But as you guys know, stacking evasion is not the only or is not like a surefire zero counterplay sort of playstyle, as we do have characters like Death to the Ray and even Shaltir alongside other evasion characters that don't need Assassin Cartusia to work. So with that, I think these are fine changes for him, but honestly wish that they gave him something else. I don't think he necessarily needs more damage, as opposed to maybe a bit more survivability or some sort of like hiding mechanic or some sort of utility otherwise to the team. Change is honestly pretty mid though. Now for the artifacts, the newest or the first change that we have here is to indestructible gators, and it is pretty interesting that the timing of this artifact is coming as Robin is, well, making her appearance to Epic 7. And the main reason why I think this is interesting is because formerly I was a bit upset. I shouldn't say upset, but I was a bit let down that, you know, oh, I just realized this is on Gator. This entire section was all for nothing. I apologize. Originally, what I was going to say is that, well, with Gator now being AoE, maybe you could, you know, use someone like Robin on Gator, but, well, this is a warrior artifact. I apologize. That's a bit of a goof on my end. But in any case, now what this effect allows you to do is now apply a one-turn burn with a 50 to 100% chance, presumably, you know, based on whatever level of your artifact is. But the thing is that formerly, while it was locked behind single target, now it's AoE. This is maybe an artifact that you use on Holiday Euphine, maybe an artifact that you would use this, or you would maybe use this for, or who you'd use this on. But honestly, I think that a bit like Holiday Euphine is more of a an anti or a trapping character, or a punish the enemy team for trying to do too many debuffs type character. So with that being the case, I'm not sure if this will actually be too viable or too much of a significant change. However, there's probably some PvE that exists in the game currently that will make this viable. And finally, the Glow Wings change now grants, I guess, a stronger barrier. Now, again, to be clear, this is a little bit weird. They effectively, I assume, like based on like the level change here, have buffed the amount of shield that this barrier gives. 60 per level to all allies for 2 turns. I'm assuming like if all the characters are, what, I believe they're all level 60, that means it's a 3600 shield to all allies. This could be pretty significant, but Glow Wings as a ranger artifact has a lot to compete with others like Flawn's soul generating artifact, Guiding Light being an artifact, Renewed Will being pretty good. All these other artifacts are pretty difficult to compete with, and as a result, I don't know if this is going to make her super viable, but I do know that there are a few players that do run ranger openers with this so that they don't end up getting one shot. But otherwise, guys, that's going to be it for today's patch. Honestly, I think this is a pretty patch. I think Charles being buffed is hilarious. But otherwise, I think the rest of the characters kind of just have super minor, or like super kind of like surface level changes, like quality of life at best. Not too sold on the Fenris changes. Hopefully I'm wrong. I'd actually love to be proved wrong, but based on my experience currently playing Cleave, it has felt the same as before, which is okay. Even if I get debuffed, I was dead to begin with anyways. Like, it's not like if I didn't have a buff I was going to survive one additional hit. It's either I landed the debuffs on Litica and they're not moving, or I just got hit in the head and I'm dead anyways. In any case though, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.